Mister, are you lost too? In the middle of a violent snowstorm at the airport, a mafia boss, bleeding heavily, suddenly stopped when he heard that question. Not from the police, not from his enemies, but from a little girl skinny and trembling in a torn coat, yet with eyes so pure it hurt to look at. He had ordered people to be killed without even blinking. Yet in that moment, a single innocent sentence tightened around his heart like a fist. Why would a child who has nothing be the only one brave enough to walk toward him? And what will happen when he realizes she is not a stranger at all? If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet power of kindness, especially when no one else chooses to show to it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Which city and country are you in, and what time is it there right now? It's always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over the world. If moments like this remind you of the beauty of humanity, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful stories that celebrate compassion, courage, and the simple acts of kindness that can change life. The wind howled through the cavernous halls of O'Hare International Airport in Chicago on a bitter October evening in 2025, carrying the sharp bite of early winter that had arrived far too soon. Snow flurries, unseasonable and relentless, whipped against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the runway lights into smeared halos of white and amber. Inside, the terminal thrummed with the low-grade panic of delayed travelers, families slumped over luggage carts, business people pacing with phones pressed to ears, announcements crackling overhead like distant thunder. The air smelled of burnt coffee, wet coats, and the faint metallic tang of exhaustion. Vincent Russo sat alone on a bench near Gate C-27. His broad shoulders hunched forward as though the weight of the storm pressed directly on them. He was a tall man, fair-skinned, with the kind of sharp, weathered features that belonged to someone who had spent too many nights deciding who lived and who paid. His dark overcoat, tailored wool expensive enough to turn heads even in this chaos, fell open slightly at the front, revealing a crisp white shirt, now marred by a spreading stain of crimson beneath his left ribs. The wound was fresh, courtesy of a rival cruise blade in a back-alley meeting that had gone south hours earlier. He pressed a folded handkerchief against it with steady pressure, the motion practiced almost casual. Pain radiated in slow-burning waves, but he welcomed it. It kept his mind sharp. In his other hand, he cradled a faded leather baseball, the red stitching worn thin from years of being turned over and over in restless fingers. It had once belonged to his younger brother Tommy, killed in a crossfire when Vinny was 23, and still foolish enough to believe family could stay clean in their world. The ball was the last thing Tommy had touched before the bullets came. Vinny carried it everywhere, a quiet penance he never spoke aloud. Tonight the leather felt heavier than usual, as though it knew the blood on his hands was no longer just metaphorical. He stared at the scuffed floor jaw, tight mind, churning through calculations. How long until the rival's men tracked him here? How many exits he could reach before bleeding out? How many lives he had ruined to sit on this bench with more money than most people saw in lifetimes, yet feeling hollower than the wind outside. Guilt gnawed at him like an old wound that refused to scar remorse for the brother he could not save, for the empire built on fear instead of loyalty, for the man he had become when he chose power over everything else. He was wealthy beyond reason, powerful enough to bend laws and lives alike, yet the silence inside him roared louder than any storm. That was when the small voice cut through. "Mister, are you lost too?" Vinny's head snapped up. A girl no more than 6 years old stood a few feet away, clutching a threadbare pink backpack that looked as though it had been dragged through too many winters. Her coat was thin denim frayed at the cuffs, zipped all the way to her chin against the chill that seeped through the terminal doors. Dark curls escaped a knit cap too big for her head, and her cheeks were flushed not from warmth but from the cold she had clearly endured for far too long. Her eyes, large brown, impossibly clear, studied him without fear, only concern. She tilted her head. "You look hurt. Like when my doll's arm comes off and nobody fixes it." Vinny blinked, the words landing somewhere deep and unused. For a moment the calculations stopped. He scanned her quickly, no adult in sight, no luggage tag, no frantic parent calling her name. A lost child in an airport the size of a small city. Protocol screamed at him to flag security, to walk away, to disappear into the crowd before anyone connected the blood on his shirt to the man who ordered it spilled. But she took one small step closer, unafraid. "I can help you find your way," she said softly, her voice timid yet certain, the way only children speak when they believe the world can still be made right. "My name is Sophie. What's yours?" Vinny's throat tightened. Something in her tone, pure, unguarded, reached past the walls he had spent decades fortifying. He glanced down at the baseball in his hand, then back at her. The handkerchief pressed harder against his side. Fresh pain flared, but it felt distant now. "Vincent," he answered, voice low and rough. "But most people call me Vinny." Sophie nodded solemnly, as though filing the information away for safekeeping. She glanced around the terminal, the endless sea of strangers, the flickering departure boards announcing more cancellations than back at him. Are you waiting for someone, or are you just sitting here because you're lost inside? The question hit like a fist to the chest. Vinny felt the air leave his lungs. Lost inside. How could a child see that when grown men who owed him their lives never did? He cleared his throat, forcing calm. I'm waiting out the storm. What about you, Sophie? Where's your mom? Her small face clouded. She went to find medicine. My little brother is sick again, fever coughing all night. She said she'd be right back, but it's been a long time. Her lower lip trembled for half a second before she caught it. I stayed by the bench like she told me, but then people kept bumping me and I got turned around. Vinny's gaze softened against his will. He saw the dirt smudged on her cheek, the way her sneakers were held together with duct tape, the faint tremor in her hands from cold or hunger, or both. Poverty clung to her like frost-thin frame, hollow cheeks, eyes too old for 6 years. He had seen that look before in mirrors from his own childhood in Little Italy, before the money came and the blood followed. A sharp twinge in his side reminded him he had no business playing savior, yet he could not look away. All right, he said quietly. Let's find her together. Sophie's eyes widened. Really, you don't have to. You look like you need a doctor. Vinny almost laughed, short, bitter, surprised. I've had worse. Come on. He stood slowly, hiding the wince as fabric pulled against torn flesh. Sophie hesitated only a moment before slipping her small, cold hand into his much larger one. Her fingers were like ice, but she gripped him with surprising strength as though trusting him was the most natural thing in the world. They started walking. The terminal swallowed them, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, holiday decorations half-strung and forgotten travelers rushing past with suitcases that cost more than Sophie's entire wardrobe. Vinny kept his pace slow to match hers every step, sending fresh fire through his ribs. He scanned faces, exits, shadows, old habits. Somewhere out there, the men who had cut him were still hunting. He should have left her at the information desk, vanished into the night, but her hand in his felt like an anchor. As they moved toward the food court, Sophie had said her mother liked the pretzel stand because it was cheap. Vinny's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it at first, then glanced at the screen. A text from one of his lieutenants. They know you're at O'Hare. 2 cars circling the parking garage. Stay dark. His jaw clenched. The guilt twisted deeper. Tommy's baseball burned in his grip like accusation. He had built this life on choices that left children like Sophie exposed to the fallout. And now one of them was holding his hand. Sophie tugged gently. Mr. Vinny, you're squeezing too hard. He loosened his grip immediately. Sorry, kid. She looked up at him, curious. Why do you carry that baseball? Is it lucky? Vinny stared at the worn leather. It belonged to someone important. A long time ago. Sophie nodded, accepting the answer without pressing. My mom says important things help when you're scared. Maybe it can help you feel better. The words landed softly, but they struck hard. Vinny felt something crack inside remorse, sharp and sudden for every life he had taken or ruined for the brother he could not protect, for the empire that kept him rich and empty. And now this child, destitute and trusting, was offering him comfort. He swallowed against the thickness in his throat. Maybe it will. They kept walking. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. Vinny's wound throbbed in time with his heartbeat, but the real pain was deeper, gnawing guilt that he had become the kind of man who left children like Sophie to fend for themselves in a world he helped make crueler. Yet her small hand stayed in his steady and warm despite the cold. And for the first time in years, Vincent Russo did not feel entirely lost. The terminal corridor stretched ahead like an endless fluorescent-lit tunnel, the kind that swallowed hope if you walked it too long. Overhead speakers droned another round of cancellations. Flight 417 to Denver, Flight 892 to Minneapolis, all grounded until the blizzard relented. Travelers slumped against walls or sat cross-legged on the carpet, some rocking infants, others staring blankly at phones that no longer held signal. The air had grown thicker, heavy with the scent of damp wool, spilled soda, and the faint sourness of people who had been wearing the same clothes for too many hours. Vincent Russo walked beside Sophie with deliberate slowness matching her short, careful steps. Each movement pulled at the gash beneath his shirt. The handkerchief he pressed there was already soaked through, warm and sticky against his palm. He could feel the slow seep of blood traveling down his side, pooling at the waistband of his trousers. The pain was constant now, a low grinding companion, but it paled next to the sharper ache blooming somewhere deeper in the center of his chest, where nothing had been allowed to live for years. Sophie's small hand stayed firmly in his. Her fingers were still cold, but they no longer trembled quite so violently. She glanced up at him every few paces as though checking he had not vanished. We should look by the pretzel place first, she said, in that soft, polite voice children use when they are trying very hard to be brave. Mom likes the cinnamon ones. She says they're the only sweet thing she can afford sometimes. Vinny nodded, once throat too tight to speak. The casual cruelty of that sentence landed like a blade between his ribs. He had restaurants, 3 legitimate ones downtown, another 5 fronts scattered across the city, where cinnamon pretzels cost $12 and came with imported dipping sauce nobody asked for. He had never once considered that $12 could be the difference between hunger and not. They passed a family of 4 huddled around a single shared bottle of water. The mother looked up as they went by, eyes flicking from Vinny's expensive coat to Sophie's duct-taped sneakers, then quickly away. Vinny felt the judgment like heat on his skin. He knew what they saw, a man who did not belong with a child who did not belong with him. He should have let go of her hand. He should have flagged the nearest uniformed officer and walked into the shadows where he belonged. Instead, he tightened his grip just enough to reassure her, not enough to hurt. His phone vibrated again in his coat pocket. He ignored it. The messages would be the same. 2 black SUVs in the short-term garage. They're asking questions. Spotter in Terminal 3 saw you. Boss, get out now. He knew the protocol. Disappear. Bleed somewhere private. Let the wound close on its own, or let one of his doctors stitch it in silence. That was how he had survived every close call since he was 19. But Sophie's small palm pressed against his, and the protocol crumbled like dry paper. They reached the pretzel stand. The metal shutters were down, lights off. A handwritten sign taped to the counter read, "Closed due to weather. Back tomorrow if planes fly." Sophie stared at it for a long moment, then let out a tiny defeated breath. "She's not here," she whispered. Vinny crouched, slowly hiding the fresh flare of pain, and brought himself to her level. "We'll keep looking. She's here somewhere. Moms don't leave." Sophie's eyes searched his face. Sometimes they have to. When there's no money for medicine or heat or anything. Her voice cracked on the last word, small and thin. "Last winter we slept in the car for 3 weeks. Mom said it was an adventure. But I was so cold I couldn't feel my toes in the morning." Vinny felt something tear inside him, violent, sudden, irreversible. He had spent winters in heated penthouses overlooking Lake Michigan fireplaces, roaring whiskey older than Sophie in crystal glasses. And this child had slept in a car breath, fogging the windows, small body curled against the cold leather seats while her mother whispered apologies into the dark. He swallowed hard. "That won't happen again," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "Not tonight." Sophie blinked at him, confused. "You don't even know us." "I know cold," he answered quietly. "And I know it's not fair." For a moment they stayed like that, him crouched, her standing, the world rushing past in a blur of coats and rolling suitcases. Then Sophie reached out and touched the sleeve of his overcoat with one hesitant finger as though testing whether it was real. "You're bleeding," she said softly. "A lot." Vinny glanced down. The stain had spread farther, dark against the white shirt. He forced a small, crooked smile. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Her brows drew together, fierce in their worry. "My brother had a cut once. Mom said if you don't stop it, bad things happen." She slipped her backpack off, one shoulder rummaged inside with frantic little hands, and pulled out a crumpled package of tissues, cheap single-ply, the kind that came free with fast food meals. She peeled one free and held it out to him. Vinny stared at the tissue in her palm. It trembled slightly. He took it, folded it carefully, and pressed it beneath the handkerchief. "Thank you," he murmured. Sophie watched him, then nodded once satisfied. "Now we can keep looking." They turned away from the shuttered stand. Vinny straightened slowly, vision swimming for a second, as blood loss tugged at the edges of his sight. He blinked it away. Not yet. Not while she needed him. They had made it only 30 yards when 2 men in dark jackets stepped out from behind a pillar, broad shoulders, hard eyes, the kind of purposeful walk that did not belong to delayed passengers. One of them met Vinny's gaze and gave the smallest nod, the kind that said, "We found you." Vinny's free hand moved instinctively toward the concealed holster beneath his coat, then froze. Sophie's fingers were still laced through his. He could not draw here. Not with her. He changed direction smoothly, guiding her toward the moving walkway that led to Concourse B. "Let's try the information desk that way," he said, voice calm. "Moms always end up there when they're scared." Sophie nodded trustingly. Behind them, the 2 men followed 20 paces, back then 15. Vinny felt their presence like pressure on his spine. His pulse hammered against the wound, fresh blood seeping faster. The hallway lights flickered once power surged from the storm, then steadied. He glanced down at Sophie. She was scanning faces, chin up, determined. "She has brown hair like mine," she told him, "and a blue scarf. She always ties it tight when she's worried." Vinny listened, memorizing every detail. The guilt coiled tighter. He had never memorized anyone's scarf color. He had memorized drop points, burner numbers, escape routes. Never tenderness. They stepped onto the moving walkway. The two men stepped on behind them, closer now. Vinny angled his body slightly, placing himself between Sophie and the threat without making it obvious. His mind raced. If they moved here, if they tried to take him, she would be caught in the middle. The thought sent ice through his veins, sharper than any blade. Sophie tugged his hand. "Mr. Vinny, you're shaking." He looked down. His free hand was trembling, not from cold, not from pain, but from the sudden consuming terror that something might happen to her because of him. "I'm all right," he lied. She studied him for a long moment. Then without warning, she stepped closer and wrapped both arms around his waist in a small, fierce hug. "It's okay to be scared," she whispered against his coat. "Mom says even grown-ups get scared. You just have to hold on tighter." Vinny went completely still. The hug lasted only seconds, but it felt like years. Warmth seeped through his coat, through the layers of guilt and blood and years of solitude. Something cracked wide open inside him, remorse so sharp it stole his breath, love so sudden and fierce it felt like violence. This child, this thin, cold, impossibly kind child, was holding on to him as though he were worth holding. He rested one careful hand on the back of her head, the baseball still clutched in the other. "I won't let go," he promised, voice rough. The moving walkway ended. They stepped off. The two men stepped off behind them. Vinny made a decision in that heartbeat. He would get her to safety. He would find her mother. And then whatever came after, he would burn every bridge that led back to this life, if it meant keeping her from ever knowing what cold really felt like again. He guided her forward, heart pounding with something fiercer than fear. They walked into the next corridor, the storm howling louder outside the glass, and Vincent Russo, wealthy, powerful, broken, felt the first true pull of something he had never allowed himself to want. A reason to stay alive. The corridor to Concourse B curved gently, its polished floor reflecting the overhead lights in long, wavering streaks that made the world feel unsteady. Sophie's sneakers squeaked faintly with each step, a small, rhythmic sound that cut through the distant murmur of voices and rolling luggage wheels. Vinny kept her slightly ahead of him now, his body angled to shield her from the open space behind. The two men in dark jackets had fallen back but had not disappeared. He caught glimpses of them in the reflective glass of a closed newsstand, shoulders squared, eyes scanning, patient as predators who knew the kill was only a matter of time. His side burned hotter with every breath. The makeshift bandage of tissues and handkerchief had soaked through completely. He could feel the slow, warm trickle sliding beneath his belt. Blood loss was starting to pull at the corners of his vision, turning the edges soft and gray. He forced himself to focus on Sophie, on the way her thin shoulders rose and fell beneath the too large denim coat on the determined set of her small jaw, as she scanned every face that passed. "We should check the family restroom area next," she said, voice still soft and polite, though it trembled at the edges now. "Mom takes my brother there when he's fussy. She says it's quieter." Vinny nodded. "Lead the way." She did, small hand slipping from his only long enough to point toward a side hallway, marked with blue signs. As they turned the corner, the noise of the main terminal dulled to a low hum. Here the lights were dimmer, the carpet worn thinner, the air cooler, as though this forgotten wing had been left to the cold outside. A single vending machine glowed in the shadows, its glass front cracked, half the snacks gone. Sophie paused in front of it, staring at the rows of colorful wrappers she would never reach for. "I had $1 once," she whispered. "Mom gave it to me for my birthday. I wanted the chocolate bar with the peanuts, but the machine ate the dollar and didn't give anything back." She looked up at him, eyes wide with the memory of that small betrayal. "Mom cried when I told her. Not loud, just quiet, like she was too tired to make noise." Vinny felt the words land like stones in his chest. He had machines like this in his restaurants, vending units stocked with imported chocolate never meant to take a child's single dollar and swallow it whole. He had never once thought about the people who fed them coins they could not afford to lose. He reached into his coat pocket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. Without a word, he fed it into the machine. Buttons lit up. He pressed the code for the chocolate bar with peanuts, then another for a bottle of water, then a small bag of trail mix. The items dropped into the tray with soft thuds. Sophie stared. He crouched again, wincing as the motion tore at his wound, and handed her the chocolate first. "Happy belated birthday," he said quietly. Her fingers shook as she took it. She looked from the bar to him, then back again, as though the simple act defied every rule she had learned about the world. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I wanted to." Tears welled in her eyes, sudden, bright, unstoppable. She blinked them back fiercely, then tore open the wrapper with careful fingers. The first bite was small, reverent. She chewed slowly, eyes closing for a moment as though tasting something holy. Vinny watched her throat burning. He had bought entire buildings, silenced enemies, built fortunes on fear, and yet this single chocolate bar given without expectation felt like the most expensive thing he had ever purchased. The remorse surged again, violent and unrelenting, for every child he had never noticed, for every mother who had cried in silence while he counted cash in heated rooms. Sophie broke off a piece and held it out to him. You should have some too. Sharing makes it taste better. He took the small square, placed it on his tongue. The sweetness hit like a memory of Tommy sneaking chocolate from the corner store of Winters when candy was the only warmth they could afford. He swallowed past the lump in his throat. They kept moving. The family restroom area was empty except for a janitor mopping the floor in slow, tired arcs. No sign of a woman in a blue scarf. Sophie's steps began to drag. Her shoulders slumped. The sugar rush had faded fast, her small body reminding her how little fuel it had been running on. Vinny glanced behind them. The two men were closer now, lingering near the hallway, entrance phones out, pretending to check messages. One of them looked directly at Vinny and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A warning. We're waiting. Vinny's pulse hammered. He guided Sophie toward a cluster of empty benches near an emergency exit. Sit for a minute, he said. Rest. She obeyed without argument, curling her legs beneath her. The coat swallowed her small frame. She looked up at him with sudden fear. What if she can't find me? What if she thinks I left her? She won't think that. Vinny sat beside her, carefully hiding the fresh bloom of pain. Moms always find their kids. Sophie hugged her knees. Sometimes moms get taken away. Like when the landlord changed the locks last month. We came home and everything was on the sidewalk. Mom sat on the curb and didn't move for hours. I thought she was broken. Vinny closed his eyes for a second against the image. He had men who collected rent for him, men who changed locks when payments were late, who left families on sidewalks without a second thought. He had signed the checks that paid those men. The guilt twisted deeper, a knife turning slowly. That won't happen to you again, he said, voice rough. Not while I'm here. Sophie looked at him, really looked, searching his face for the lie she had learned to expect from the world. She found none. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned against his arm. The contact was light, almost nothing, but it anchored him in a way nothing else ever had. For a long moment they sat in silence. The storm rattled the windows. Announcements droned on. Somewhere behind them, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Vinny tensed. He shifted slightly, placing his body between Sophie and the hallway. The two men stopped at the edge of the seating area, one leaning casually against a pillar, the other crossing his arms. They did not speak. They did not need to, Sophie noticed. Her small hand tightened on his sleeve. Who are those men? She whispered. People I know, Vinny answered. They're not friends. Her eyes widened. Are they bad? They're complicated. She swallowed. Are you scared of them, Vinny? Looked down at her. The truth burned on his tongue. No. I'm scared for you. The words hung between them, simple, raw, devastating. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Then she did something that shattered him completely. She climbed into his lap, thin arms wrapping around his neck, face buried against his shoulder. Vinny froze. No one had held him like this since Tommy. No one had trusted him like this in decades. He felt the heat of her small body against his chest, the faint tremor of exhaustion and fear, the steady beat of her heart against the chaos of his own. He wrapped one arm around her, careful, reverent, while the other kept pressure on his wound. The baseball rested, forgotten on the bench beside them. The two men watched. One of them took out his phone, typed something, then slipped it back into his pocket. A message sent. Reinforcements coming. Vinny's mind raced. He could fight here, could end this now, but not with her in his arms. He could run, but where? The airport was locked down, the storm raging outside. He could call his own people, but that would drag her into his world, the very thing he had sworn in that moment she would never touch. Sophie lifted her head. Tears streaked her cheeks. Don't leave me, she whispered. Please don't leave me. The plea tore through him like gunfire. Remorse, love, terror, all of it collided in a single violent wave. He had spent his life leaving people behind, brothers, friends, promises. He had told himself it was necessary, that power demanded solitude. But this child, this fragile, trusting child, had changed the equation forever. I won't, he promised, voice breaking for the first time in years. I swear it. He stood slowly, lifting her with him, despite the fire in his side. She clung to him like a lifeline. The two men straightened, sensing the shift. Vinny met their eyes across the empty space. No words. Just a look that said everything. Try to take her, and I will burn this city down. Then he turned and walked away, Sophie in his arms, the baseball tucked into his coat pocket, the storm howling outside, and the shadows closing in behind them. The search continued. But something else had begun, a bond forged in blood and chocolate and quiet promises. And Vincent Russo, wealthy, powerful, haunted, knew he would never be the same. The emergency exit corridor ended in a T-junction, one arm leading back toward the brighter chaos of the main terminal, the other dipping down a short flight of stairs to a lower level, where service doors and employee lockers lined the walls. Vinny chose the stairs without hesitation. The two men in dark jackets had closed the distance again. Their footsteps echoed now deliberate and unhurried, the sound of hunters who no longer needed to hide. Sophie clung to his neck, face pressed against his shoulder, her small breaths warm against the collar of his coat. She had stopped asking questions 5 minutes earlier, either from exhaustion or from the quiet certainty that whatever came next, he would face it first. Vinny's legs felt heavier with each step down. Blood loss had turned his movements sluggish, the edges of his vision pulsing gray. The wound throbbed in time with his heartbeat, a relentless reminder that time was no longer on his side. Yet he carried her as though she weighed nothing, as though the weight of her trust was the only thing keeping him upright. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway opened into a small, dimly lit atrium, an forgotten pocket of the airport where lost luggage carts sat abandoned, and a single help desk glowed beneath a flickering fluorescent bulb. A woman stood there back to them, speaking in low, urgent tones to the attendant behind the counter. Brown hair tied back in a frayed ponytail, a thin blue scarf knotted tightly around her neck, as though it could hold her together. Her shoulders were hunched hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard the knuckles had gone white. Sophie lifted her head. "Mom," she whispered. The word was barely audible, yet it sliced through the air like a bell. The woman turned. Emily, her face pale, drawn, shadowed by sleepless nights, crumpled the instant she saw her daughter. She stumbled forward, knees buckling, catching herself on the arm of a nearby chair. Tears spilled immediately, silent and unstoppable. "Sophie, oh God, Sophie." Sophie slid from Vinny's arms and ran the last few steps. Emily dropped to her knees and caught her in a crushing embrace, burying her face in the child's curls. Sobs shook her thin frame, deep wrenching sounds that spoke of hours spent imagining the worst. Sophie clung back just as fiercely, small hands fisting in her mother's worn sweater. Vinny remained where he was, several paces back, rooted by something heavier than pain. He watched them, mother and daughter, folded into each other, and felt the world tilt. Emily's face, older now, lined with worry and hunger, was unmistakable. 7 years had passed since he had last seen her, since he had walked away from the small apartment in Pilsen with promises he knew he could not keep. He had chosen the life that offered power instead of the one that offered love. And now here she was, thinner than he remembered, eyes hollowed by too many winters, holding the child he had never known existed. The baseball slipped from his coat pocket and rolled across the tile floor, coming to rest near Emily's knee. She looked down at it, then up at Vinny. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught. She stared at him, really stared, taking in the tailored coat now stained dark with blood, the sharp lines of his face, the faded leather ball that had once been a gift between two people who thought they could outrun their circumstances. "Vincent," she breathed. The name hung in the air between them. Sophie pulled back slightly, looking from her mother to the man who had carried her through the terminal. "You know him?" she asked, voice small and confused. Emily did not answer immediately. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the baseball. Her thumb brushed the worn stitching, the same stitching she had once repaired with careful stitches after Tommy dropped it in the street. "You still have it," she said softly. Vinny's throat closed. He could not speak. The guilt that had been gnawing at him all night surged into something monstrous, violent, suffocating, tearing at the walls he had built around his heart. This was not just any lost child. This was his daughter. The daughter he had never known because he had chosen ambition over family power, over promises, silence over truth. Emily rose slowly, still holding Sophie against her side. Her eyes, red-rimmed, exhausted, searched his face. "She found you," she said. It was not a question. Vinny managed a single nod. Emily's gaze dropped to the spreading stain on his shirt. Horror flickered across her features. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he lied, again the words automatic. "It's not nothing." Her voice cracked. "You're bleeding through your coat." Sophie looked up at him then, eyes wide with sudden fear. "Mr. Vinny." He forced a small, reassuring smile. "I'm all right, kid. Promise." But he was not all right. Not even close. The revelation had cracked something fundamental inside him. Every choice he had made since leaving Emily, every deal, every threat, every night spent counting money instead of counting blessings, crashed over him in waves of remorse, so intense he could barely breathe. He had left her to raise their child alone. He had left her to sleep in cars, to cry quietly on sidewalks, to feed $1 to a machine that swallowed it whole. And all the while he had lived in penthouses with views of the city he controlled, whiskey in hand, believing solitude was the price of power. The two men in dark jackets appeared at the far end of the atrium, blocking the hallway back to the main terminal. They did not advance, but their presence was threat enough. Vinny felt the shift in the air, the tightening of muscles, the calculation of angles. His hand moved instinctively toward his side, then stopped. Not here. Not with them watching, Emily noticed. She stepped in front of Sophie, shielding her instinctively. "Who are they? People who want something from me," Vinny said quietly. Emily's face paled further. "Because of what you do." It was not an accusation, only a statement of fact heavy with years of understanding. Vinny met her eyes. Yes. Silence stretched, thick, painful, full of everything unsaid. Sophie looked between them, confusion, deepening into something closer to fear. She reached for her mother's hand, then hesitated, glancing back at Vinny, as though torn between the two people who had kept her safe tonight. Emily knelt again, cupping Sophie's face. "Sweetheart, this is your father." The words landed softly, yet they struck like thunder. Sophie's eyes widened. She turned to Vinny slowly, searching his face for the truth. "You're my dad." Vinny felt the ground shift beneath him. He had faced guns, knives, betrayal, yet nothing had ever undone him, like this single question from a 6-year-old girl who should have hated him, and instead looked at him with wonder. He sank to one knee slowly, painfully bringing himself to her level. Blood seeped faster, now warm against his skin, but he ignored it. "I didn't know," he said, voice rough with emotion he could no longer contain. "I swear to you, Sophie, I didn't know." Tears filled her eyes again. She looked back at her mother, then at him. "But you helped me anyway." Vinny's chest heaved. "Yeah, I did." Emily watched them both, her own tears falling silently. She did not reach for him, did not offer forgiveness yet, but she did not pull Sophie away either. The two men took a single step forward. Vinny rose unsteady, vision blurring, and positioned himself between them and the small family he had only just found. His hand rested lightly on Sophie's shoulder, protective, possessive, in a way he had never allowed himself to feel before. "Stay behind me," he murmured. Sophie nodded, pressing close to her mother. Emily whispered Vincent. "What are you going to do?" He looked down at the baseball on the floor, then at the child who carried his eyes, his stubborn chin, his capacity for kindness he had long thought lost. "I'm going to keep you safe," he said. And in that moment, blood pooling at his feet, enemies closing in, heart tearing itself apart with remorse and love in equal measure, Vincent Russo understood that some promises were worth more than empires. He stepped forward. The atrium lights flickered once. The storm outside roared louder. And the reunion that should have been gentle became the beginning of something fierce, unbreakable, and terrifyingly real. The small atrium felt suddenly too exposed, its dim lights casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them like fingers. The two men at the hallway entrance had not moved closer, but their stillness was worse than pursuit, it was calculation. Vinny could almost hear the silent conversation passing between them. "Wait, he's bleeding. He's carrying baggage now. He'll make a mistake." Vinny kept his body between Emily and Sophie, and the threat, one arm still loosely around the child's shoulders. His wound screamed with every heartbeat, the blood now a steady seep that darkened the hem of his coat. Dizziness tugged at him in waves, but he locked his knees and breathed through it. He could not falter here. Not now. Emily rose slowly, lifting Sophie with her, as though the girl were made of glass. Her eyes still wet, still wide with shock, flicked from Vinny to the men then back. "We can't stay here," she whispered, "not with them watching." Vinny nodded once. "There's a private lounge on the upper level. Airline Club. I have access." The words came out steady, but inside everything churned remorse, crashing against a fierce, protective instinct he had never allowed himself to feel. He had memberships to places like that because power bought quiet corners in chaos. He had never once imagined using one to shelter a family he had abandoned. Emily hesitated. Pride flickered in her gaze, the same stubborn pride that had once made her refuse his money when things were still new between them. "We don't need you do," he cut in gently. "Sophie's cold. You're shaking. And I'm not asking." She looked down at her daughter, whose small face was pressed against her sweater, eyes darting between the adults. Sophie's thin frame trembled, not just from fear, but from the bone-deep exhaustion of too many nights spent in drafty rooms, too many meals skipped so her little brother could eat. Emily's shoulders sagged. She nodded. Vinny led the way, moving with careful deliberation. He took them through a side door marked Authorized Personnel, only flashing a slim black card from his wallet that made the lock click open without question. Behind them, the two men took a single step forward, then stopped as though an invisible line had been drawn. They knew better than to follow into secured space. Not yet. The stairwell was narrow and cold metal steps ringing underfoot. Vinny went first, shielding them from whatever might wait above. Emily followed with Sophie cradled against her hip. The climb was slow. Vinny's vision tunneled at the edges, black spots dancing. He gripped the rail until his knuckles whitened, forcing one foot in front of the other. Behind him, Emily's breathing was shallow, ragged. Sophie was silent now, clinging with the quiet desperation of a child who had learned early that noise could cost you. At the top, another door opened into a hushed corridor lined with frosted glass. The Airline Club lounge lay beyond warm lighting, deep leather chairs, the faint scent of fresh coffee and polished wood. A staff member at the entrance glanced at Vinny's card, then at the blood on his coat, and said nothing. She simply stepped aside. Inside, the contrast struck like a physical blow. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, soft jazz played from hidden speakers, fireplaces crackled behind glass screens, trays of untouched pastries sat on sideboards. A handful of delayed business travelers occupied scattered seats, laptops open, oblivious to the small family that had just entered from another world. Vinny guided them to a corner booth near the windows, far from the entrance, far from prying eyes. He helped Emily settle Sophie onto the cushioned bench, then eased himself down opposite them, hiding the wince as his side protested. Blood had soaked through to his trousers now. He could feel it sticky against his skin. Emily stared at the luxury around them, the heavy crystal water glasses, the folded linen napkins, the view of snow swirling against the glass like white fire. Her hands shook as she smoothed Sophie's curls. "This place? It costs more than we spend in a month on rent," she said quietly. Vinny did not answer right away. He reached for a small wool throw draped over the back of the booth and draped it around Sophie's shoulders. The girl pulled it tight, burrowing into the warmth like it was something rare and precious. "It's just a blanket," he said. Emily's laugh was small, broken. "To you." The words landed softly, yet they cut deep. Vinny felt the old guilt surge again, hotter, sharper, more violent than before. He had rooms full of blankets like this in his penthouse, cashmere, silk, Egyptian cotton stacked in closets he rarely opened. And this child, his daughter, had wrapped herself in newspaper on the worst nights to keep out the wind. A server approached, young, polite, trained not to ask questions. Vinny ordered quietly hot chocolate for Sophie, tea for Emily, black coffee for himself, and food, warm soup, sandwiches, fruit. The server nodded and left without comment. Sophie watched the exchange with wide eyes. When the server was gone, she whispered, "Is this real?" Vinny met her gaze. "It's real." She looked at the blanket, then at him. "You're really my dad?" The question, simple, direct, nearly undid him. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, I am." Emily's hand tightened on Sophie's. She did not speak, but her eyes held his, searching, guarded, full of years of unanswered questions. The silence stretched thick with everything unsaid. Outside, lightning cracked across the black sky, illuminating the runway in stark white flashes. Inside, the fireplace popped softly. Sophie broke the quiet first. She reached across the table and touched Vinny's hand, the one not pressing against his wound. Her fingers were still cold but steadier now. "You're bleeding a lot," she said again, voice small and worried. "We need to fix it." Vinny looked down. The stain had grown dark and accusing. He started to protest, but Sophie was already rummaging in her backpack. She pulled out the same crumpled packet of tissues from earlier, fewer left now, and a small roll of adhesive bandage she must have taken from a school nurse sometime. "Here," she said, offering them like treasures. Vinny stared at the cheap peeling bandage roll. He had private doctors on call 24 hours a day, surgeons who flew in for stitches. Yet this child, malnourished, sleep-deprived, carrying the weight of poverty in her too thin arms, was trying to save him. He took the tissues gently. "Thank you." Emily watched, eyes glistening. She reached over and helped Sophie press a fresh tissue against the wound through his shirt. Her touch was careful, almost reverent. "You need stitches," she murmured. "This isn't enough." "I know," he said, "but it'll hold for now." Sophie looked up at him, eyes shining with sudden tears. "Don't die, okay? I just found you." The plea hit him like a fist to the sternum. Vinny felt something inside him fracture, remorse so deep it stole his breath. Love so fierce it felt like violence against every wall he had ever built. He had spent years convincing himself he was better off alone, that attachments were weaknesses enemies could exploit. And now this small girl, his daughter, was asking him to live. "I won't," he promised, voice rough. "I'm not going anywhere." Emily's hand stilled on his side. She looked at him, really looked, seeing past the blood, past the power, past the years of distance. "You mean that, with everything I have left," he answered. The server returned with a tray, steaming mugs, plates of sandwiches cut into neat triangles, a bowl of sliced apples. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight. She hesitated as though afraid to touch it, afraid it might disappear. "Go on," Vinny said softly. She took a sandwich with careful fingers, took one small bite, then another. Tears slipped down her cheeks even as she ate, silent, unstoppable. Emily watched her daughter, then looked away, blinking hard. Vinny pushed a mug of hot chocolate toward Sophie. "Drink. It'll warm you up." She did, cradling the mug in both hands like it was the most precious thing she had ever held. In the quiet that followed, Vinny felt the full weight of the moment settle over him. The lounge was warm, the food abundant, the storm locked outside. Yet the real storm raged inside him, guilt for every year he had missed, for every night Sophie and Emily had gone without, for every choice that had led to this blood-soaked night. And beneath it all, a fierce, burning love for the child across from him, a love that had ignited the moment she first took his hand and refused to let go. The two men had not followed, but he knew they waited. Somewhere beyond the frosted glass doors, they waited. Vinny looked at Emily. "I'll get you both out of here. Safe. Whatever it takes." She searched his face for a long moment. Then, quietly, "We've been safe without you for 6 years." The truth stung, but he nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry." Sophie finished her sandwich, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and leaned against her mother. Her eyelids drooped the warmth and food finally pulling her toward sleep. Emily smoothed her curls. "She's never eaten like this," she whispered. "Not all at once." Vinny's throat closed. He had dined in Michelin-starred rooms, tasted vintages worth more than most people's homes, and his daughter had never known what it felt like to eat, without counting the cost. He reached across the table and covered Emily's hand with his own careful tentative. "Let me make it right," he said. "Please." Emily did not pull away. She turned her hand over, palm up, and let their fingers lace together. Just for a moment. Outside, the storm howled on. Inside, something fragile began to mend. And Vincent Russo, wealthy, powerful, bleeding, understood that sanctuary was not a place. It was the small hand trusting his, the quiet promise to never leave again, and the heart that had finally cracked wide open. The lounge windows framed a world gone white and furious. Snow lashed the glass in horizontal sheets, runway lights reduced to faint pulsing ghosts. Inside, the fireplace cast warm, flickering shadows across the booth where Sophie slept, curled against Emily's side, the wool throw tucked beneath her chin like a shield. Her small chest rose and fell in slow, even rhythm, the first peaceful sleep she had known in weeks, perhaps months. Emily's hand rested lightly on her daughter's back, fingers tracing absent circles, as though touch alone could keep the cold from returning. Vinny sat opposite them, coat draped over the chair, back to hide the worst of the blood. The wound had slowed its bleeding, but the ache had deepened into something dull and constant, like a second heartbeat. He sipped black coffee, he barely tasted, eyes never leaving the frosted doors. The two men had not entered. Club access was too exclusive for them, but he knew they waited beyond patient calculating. His phone, silenced in his pocket, vibrated once more. He ignored it. The messages would be the same threats veiled as offers, demands for surrender, reminders that empires did not forgive loose ends. Emily watched him across the table. Her face, still pale from shock and exhaustion, held a quiet wariness, now softened by something else, gratitude she did not yet trust, fear she could not yet name. "You should rest," she said softly. "You're pale as the snow out there." Vinny shook his head. "I'll rest when you're both safe." She looked down at Sophie, then back at him. "Safe from what, Vincent?" "From them," she nodded toward the doors. "Or from you?" The question landed like a quiet blade. Vinny felt it twist in the place where remorse lived raw and open tonight. "Both," he admitted. "I never wanted this life to touch either of you." Emily's laugh was small, bitter. "It already has. For years I told myself you were gone for good, that Sophie was better off without knowing the man who chose power over us." She paused, eyes glistening. "And now here you are, bleeding in a place like this, protecting us from people who want you dead. It doesn't make sense." Vinny met her gaze. "It makes perfect sense. I left because I thought I could keep you clean of it. I was wrong." Silence settled again, heavy and fragile. Outside wind howled like something alive. Inside, the only sounds were Sophie's soft breathing and the distant clink of china from the bar. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The lounge plunged into dim emergency glow, red strips along the floor, faint green exit signs. A low murmur rippled through the other passengers. Someone muttered about generators. Someone else laughed nervously. Vinny tensed. This was not the storm. This was deliberate. He rose slowly, hand pressing his side. "Stay here," he told Emily. "Don't move." She grabbed his sleeve before he could step away. "What's happening? Trouble," he said simply. "The kind that follows me." Emily's grip tightened. Fear flashed across her face, raw, unguarded. "Don't go out there." "I have to." Sophie stirred at the sound of their voices. Her eyes opened, sleepy and confused. "Mr. Vinny." He crouched beside her, forcing calm into his voice. "I'm just going to check something, kid. You stay with your mom." "Okay," Sophie nodded, but her small hand shot out and caught his wrist. "Promise you'll come back." The plea pierced him deeper than any knife. Vinny felt the violent collision inside, love crashing against guilt, protection, warring with the knowledge that his presence endangered them most. He covered her hand with his own. "I promise." He stood, coat back on, despite the fresh blood it would absorb. He moved toward the entrance. Each step measured vision steady, despite the gray haze creeping in. At the frosted doors, he paused, glancing back once. Emily held Sophie close, both watching him with wide, trusting eyes that made his chest ache. He pushed through. The corridor beyond was empty, too empty. Lights dimmed here too, emergency strips casting long red shadows. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell, multiple sets deliberate. Vinny stepped into the stairwell doorway, positioning himself where the light was poorest. 3 men appeared at the bottom of the stairs, not the 2 from before, but others. Faces he recognized. rival crew. One carried a silenced pistol half concealed in his coat. Another held a phone screen glowing as he typed a message. They stopped when they saw him. Russo, the lead man, said, voice low. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Vinny kept his hands visible, voice steady. Walk away. This doesn't have to end here. The man with the phone laughed softly. Boss says otherwise. You've got baggage now. Makes you sloppy. Vinny felt the words like ice water. They knew about Sophie. They knew about Emily. The realization sent a surge of protective fury through him, hot, blinding, almost overwhelming the pain. He took one step down. You touch them, you don't leave this building alive. The lead man raised the pistol slowly. Big words for a man bleeding out. Vinny moved fast despite everything. He closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed the gun, arm twisted. The pistol clattered down the stairs. The second man lunged. Vinny drove an elbow into his throat, sending him gasping against the wall. The third hesitated long enough for Vinny to slam him back, head cracking against the rail. No shots, no screams. Just quick, brutal efficiency born of years in shadows. He stood over them, breathing hard, blood dripping steadily now onto the concrete steps. The lead man groaned, clutching his wrist. You're dead, Russo. You know that. Vinny leaned down, voice low and lethal. Tell your boss the next man who comes near my family doesn't walk away. He turned back up the stairs, legs unsteady, vision swimming. The lounge doors seemed miles away. He pushed through. Emily was on her feet the instant he appeared. Sophie clutched against her. They stared at the fresh blood on his hands, the way he swayed slightly. Vince and Emily started. I'm fine, he lied. We need to move. Now. But before he could reach them, the lights surged back on, bright blinding. The lounge doors burst open. Not the rivals. Airport security, 4 officers, hands on radios, eyes sharp. Sir, we've had reports of a disturbance in the stairwell, the lead officer said. And you're injured. Vinny froze. Behind him, the corridor remained silent. The rivals had vanished, slipped away in the dark, or perhaps never intended to finish it here. Sophie broke from Emily's arms and ran to him, throwing herself against his legs. You came back, she whispered, voice trembling. You promised. Vinny sank to one knee, slowly, painfully, and wrapped his arms around her. She buried her face in his coat, small hands clutching fabric soaked with his blood. Emily stepped forward, tears streaming now, and knelt beside them. The officers hesitated, seeing the scene, a bleeding man, a terrified child, a mother torn between fear and something deeper. Vinny looked up at them. We're leaving. Together. The lead officer glanced at the blood, then at Sophie's tear-streaked face. He spoke into his radio quietly. Stand down. Family situation. Medical needed. Vinny felt Emily's hand on his shoulder, steady, warm. Sophie pressed closer, as though she could hold him together by sheer will. In that moment, security hovering storm raging outside, blood pooling beneath him, Vinny understood the deepest truth of the night. He had not saved them. They had saved him. Sophie's small voice broke through the haze. Don't leave us again, Dad. The word Dad landed like absolution. Vinny closed his eyes against the tears that threatened. Never, he whispered, and in the quiet stillness that followed amid flashing emergency lights and distant thunder, the violent tearing inside him began slowly to mend. The lounge had quieted to an almost reverent hush. The emergency lights had steadied into soft amber glows, the storm outside reduced to a low, constant moan against the glass. Most of the other passengers had drifted to other corners or fallen into exhausted sleep across armchairs. In their secluded booth, time seemed to slow, each breath measured, each heartbeat audible in the stillness. Sophie had fallen back asleep almost immediately after the crisis, in the stairwell curled tightly against Emily's side, one small hand still clutching the edge of Vinny's coat sleeve, even in dreams. Emily sat rigid beside her, eyes fixed on Vinny, who remained on one knee in front of them. Blood continued to seep through the hasty bandage. Sophie had insisted on applying earlier. It had soaked the wool throw in dark patches. Yet he did not move to staunch it. He could not while Sophie's fingers held him in place like an anchor. Emily's voice came first, barely above a whisper. You're still bleeding. Vinny gave the smallest nod. It'll stop soon. You need a doctor. I've had worse. She reached forward, then hesitant, and pressed her palm gently against the soaked fabric over his ribs. The touch was light, almost afraid, but it burned through him like fire. Emily's hand trembled. This isn't worse. This is you dying slowly in front of us. Vinny met her eyes. In them he saw every year he had missed every cold night she had spent alone with their daughter, every meal, skipped every landlord's threat, every whispered prayer that tomorrow would be kinder. The guilt that had been gnawing at him all night now tore with fresh ferocity, ripping through layers of denial and justification he had built like armor. He had told himself power protected people. He had lied. I should have been there, he said, the words scraping raw from his throat. Every day, every winter, every time you had to choose between heat and food. Emily's eyes filled again. She did not wipe the tears away. You chose, she said quietly. That's the part that still hurts. You chose. The truth landed like a physical weight on his chest. Vinny felt his breath hitch once, twice. He had faced death threats, betrayals, bullets meant for him, and never once flinched. But this Emily's soft, exhausted voice naming the choice he had made nearly broke him completely. Sophie stirred in her sleep, small fingers tightening on his sleeve. A tiny whimper escaped her, perhaps a dream of cold or hunger, or the fear she had carried too long for a 6-year-old. Vinny's free hand moved instinctively, smoothing her curls with a tenderness he did not know he possessed. Emily watched the gesture. Something shifted in her expression, wariness, giving way to something softer, more dangerous hope. She talks about you sometimes, Emily whispered. Not by name. Just a dad who might come back someday. She draws pictures of him. Tall, strong, always holding her hand so she doesn't get lost. Vinny closed his eyes against the image. When he opened them again, tears stood in them, unfamiliar, unwelcome, unstoppable. I don't deserve that, he said. No, Emily agreed. You don't. But she does. The words hung between them, simple, devastating, true. Vinny felt the violent collision inside him reach a crescendo remorse. So deep it numbed his limbs, love so fierce it threatened to consume him, whole terror that he would fail them again, warring with the sudden burning determination never to do so. He looked at Sophie, thin cheeks flushed from sleep, dark lashes wet from earlier tears, small body curled in on itself as though bracing against the world. Then at Emily, exhausted, proud, unbreakable, despite everything the world had done to her. I'm done choosing power, he said, voice low and rough. I'm choosing them. I'm choosing her. Emily searched his face for a long moment. Then slowly she lifted Sophie's hand from his sleeve and placed it fully in his palm. The child's fingers closed around his instinctively, even in sleep trusting. Emily's voice cracked. Then prove it. Vinny nodded once. I will. He rose slowly, painfully, and helped Emily lift Sophie into her arms. The girl woke just enough to wrap her arms around her mother's neck, mumbling something incoherent about dad and home. Emily carried her toward the exit corridor, Vinny following close behind, one hand pressed to his side, the other hovering protectively at Emily's back. They passed through the lounge doors into the corridor. The two original men in dark jackets were gone, perhaps warned off by the security response, perhaps waiting elsewhere. But Vinny knew better than to believe the threat had vanished. It had only retreated to plan. They reached a service elevator tucked behind a maintenance door. Vinny swiped his card again. The doors slid open silently. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected 3 figures, a bleeding man in a ruined coat, a weary mother holding her sleeping child, and between them something new, fragile, fierce. As the elevator descended, Emily spoke again, soft, almost afraid to break the quiet. She saved you tonight, you know. Vinny looked at her. She wouldn't let go of your hand, Emily continued. Even when the lights went out, even when those men came. She kept saying, he's hurt, we have to help him. A 6-year-old child who slept in cars, who's gone days without dinner, thought you were worth saving. Vinny felt the words land like blows, each one cracking open another layer of the armor he had worn for years. He had spent decades convincing himself he was beyond redemption, that the blood on his hands was permanent. And here was proof, small, innocent, irrefutable, that he was not. The elevator doors opened onto a lower-level, quiet, dimly lit, reserved for VIP ground transport. A black SUV waited at the curb beyond the glass door's engine, idling driver already stepping out. Vinny's people, loyal, discreet, trained to ask no questions. He guided Emily and Sophie toward it. Outside, the storm had eased slightly. Snow fell in large, slow flakes, now blanketing the tarmac in silence. At the vehicle door, Emily paused. She looked up at Vinny, really looked, seeing the blood, the exhaustion, the raw emotion he no longer tried to hide. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere safe, he said. My place. No one will find you there. Doctors will come. Food, warm beds, whatever you need. Emily hesitated. And after Vinny swallowed. After, I dismantle what I can. Quietly, legally where possible. I won't drag you into that world. But I won't leave you in yours either, not the one that lets children sleep in cars and mothers cry alone. Emily's eyes filled again. She looked down at Sophie, still asleep, still trusting, and then back at him. Okay, she whispered. Vinny opened the door. Emily slid inside, first settling Sophie carefully across her lap. Vinny followed, wincing as he folded himself into the seat. The driver closed the door without a word and pulled away from the curb. Inside the warm, leather-scented quiet of the SUV, Vinny reached across the seat and took Emily's free hand. She did not pull away. Sophie stirred, eyes fluttering open. She looked up at them, both mother on one side, father on the other, and gave a sleepy, contented smile. "You're both here," she murmured. "Yeah," Vinny said, voice thick. "We're both here." The vehicle moved through the snow headlights, cutting tunnels of white. Behind them, O'Hare receded into the night. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, change. But for the first time in years, Vincent Russo did not feel alone in it. Inside him, the violent tearing had not stopped, but it had begun to reshape itself into something else entirely. Not destruction, rebuilding. And as Sophie's small hand found his again, linking the three of them together in the dark, Vinny understood that loyalty, once given to power alone, had finally found its true object: a child's trust, a mother's quiet hope, and the fragile, fierce possibility of family. The black SUV glided through the snow-swept streets of Chicago, like a shadow moving between worlds. The city lights blurred past in soft halos, neon signs flickering above, shuttered storefronts, street lamps casting long, lonely pools on the sidewalks. Inside the vehicle, the heater hummed quietly, wrapping them in warmth that felt almost obscene after the cold nights Sophie and Emily had endured. Vinny sat in the back with them, one arm resting protectively along the seat behind Emily, the other hand still linked with Sophie's small fingers. The girl had fallen asleep again, almost immediately after they left the airport. Her head pillowed against her mother's shoulder, the wool throw pulled tight around her thin frame. Emily stared out the tinted window, watching the city slide by familiar streets she had walked countless times with empty pockets and heavier burdens. Her free hand rested on Sophie's knee, thumb tracing slow, unconscious circles. She had not spoken since they left O'Hare, but the silence between her and Vinny carried the weight of years. Vinny felt every mile like a heartbeat. His side throbbed steadily now, the makeshift bandage saturated the pain, a dull roar that matched the storm inside him. Blood had begun to seep into the leather seat beneath him, dark and accusing, yet he made no move to tend it. The physical wound seemed trivial compared to the deeper one, the knowledge that he had only hours, perhaps minutes, before he must decide how far he would go to keep this fragile new reality from shattering. The driver turned onto Lakeshore Drive. The lake stretched black and endless beyond the guardrail waves frozen in mid-crash under the snow. Vinny's penthouse waited ahead, 40 floors above the city glass walls, offering views most people would never see. A place of marble floors, heated towel racks, a kitchen stocked with food no one ever cooked. A fortress built on choices he now hated. Emily finally spoke, voice soft enough not to wake Sophie. "How long until we get there?" 10 minutes, Vinny answered. "Maybe less." She nodded slowly. And then he hesitated. "Then you rest. Both of you. Doctors will come for me. You'll have rooms, clean beds, hot food, clothes that fit. Whatever you need." Emily's laugh was small, almost soundless. "We've needed a lot of things for a long time." The words cut deeper than any rival's blade. Vinny closed his eyes for a second against the fresh wave of remorse. He saw it all again in flashes, Emily at 23, laughing in a cramped apartment kitchen while she made soup from whatever was left in the pantry. Sophie as a baby wrapped in a blanket that had once been his own. Nights when the heat was shut off and Emily sang lullabies to keep the silence from feeling so cold. He had been gone by then, already climbing the ladder, already learning that power demanded distance. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." Emily turned to look at him fully now. In the dim glow of passing streetlights, her face was etched with exhaustion and something fiercer resolve. "She asked for you in her prayers every night," she said. "Not by name, just the dad who's somewhere. She'd whisper it into her pillow so I wouldn't hear, but I always did." Vinny's throat closed. He felt the violent tearing inside him reach a new peak, guilt so sharp it stole his breath, love so overwhelming it felt like drowning. He had spent years convincing himself. Attachments were dangerous. Attachments got people killed. Attachments made you weak. Yet here he was weakened by a 6-year-old's whispered prayers, undone by the quiet trust in her sleeping face. "I should have been the one answering," he said, voice rough. Not the silence. Emily looked down at Sophie. "She never stopped believing you'd come back. Even when I stopped." The admission hung between them, heavy, honest, heartbreaking. Vinny reached across the seat and brushed a stray curl from Sophie's cheek. Her skin was warm now, flushed from the heat of the car. She stirred slightly, murmuring something soft and incoherent, then settled again with a small sigh. "I won't leave again," he promised. "Not if you'll let me stay." Emily studied him for a long moment. "It's not that simple, Vincent. You have enemies. You have a life that bleeds. And we," she gestured to Sophie, "we've survived without you. We've learned how to survive." "I know," he said again, "but surviving isn't the same as living." Emily's eyes filled. She blinked hard. "No, it isn't." The SUV slowed as they approached the private garage entrance beneath the building. The driver scanned a card. The gate rose silently. They descended into clean, brightly lit concrete rows of luxury vehicles gleaming under fluorescent lights, none of them showing a single scratch. Vinny helped Emily lift Sophie from the seat. The girl woke just enough to wrap her arms around his neck when he took her from her mother. Her small body felt impossibly light, fragile, underfed, carrying the weight of too many winters. Vinny held her close, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees, careful not to jostle his wound. They rode the private elevator up, silent mirrored walls reflecting three people who looked like they belonged to different worlds. Sophie's head rested against his shoulder breath, warm against his neck. Emily stood close enough that their arms brushed with every breath. At the penthouse level, the doors opened directly into the foyer, marble floors, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the glittering city below. The space smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. A fire already burned low in the living room hearth set by staff who anticipated his return. Vinny carried Sophie straight to the guest wing. He chose the room with the lake view soft gray linens, a king bed piled with pillows, a bathroom larger than the apartment Emily had once shared with her daughter. He laid Sophie down, gently pulling the covers over her. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Dad," she whispered, voice thick with sleep. "I'm here," he said. "Don't go away. I won't." She reached up, small hand cupping his cheek. "You're cold." Vinny smiled despite the pain. "I'll warm up." She nodded once, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. Vinny stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe. Then he turned. Emily waited in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself as though holding everything together by force of will. He crossed to her slowly. "There's another room next door. Fresh towels. Clothes in the closet sizes, I guessed. If they don't fit, we'll fix it tomorrow." Emily looked past him at Sophie, then back at him. "This place. It's beautiful." "It's empty," he said quietly. "It always has been." She stepped closer. "You're still bleeding." He glanced down. The stain had spread across most of his shirt now. "It can wait." "No," she said firmly. "It can't." She took his hand and led him to the bathroom in the master suite. Marble counters, heated floors, a mirror that spanned the entire wall. She made him sit on the edge of the tub while she found clean towels and a first aid kit from the cabinet stocked for emergencies never used until tonight. With careful hands, she peeled back the soaked fabric. The gash was deep, ragged, still oozing. Emily sucked in a breath. "You need stitches," she said. "I know." She pressed a clean towel against it hard. Vinny hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. Emily's voice trembled. "I don't know how to do this." "You're doing it," he said. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she worked. "I used to dream about this," she whispered. "Not the blood, not the danger. Just you coming home. Telling me you were sorry." Holding her, Vinny reached up, brushed the tears away with his thumb. "I am sorry." She met his eyes. "I know." In the quiet that followed only the soft drip of the faucet, the low hum of the city far below, Vinny felt the final wall inside him crumble. Not with violence, not with force, with the gentle pressure of her hands on his wound, with the sleeping child in the next room, with the woman who had survived everything he had thrown at her and still looked at him without hate. Emily finished bandaging as best she could. "This will hold until morning. Then a doctor." Vinny nodded. "Thank you." She stood back, wiping her hands on a towel. "We can't stay forever, Vincent. This world of yours, it's not ours." "I know," he said, "but tonight, just tonight, let me keep you safe." Emily looked toward the bedroom where Sophie slept, then back at him. "One night," she agreed softly. Vinny stood slowly, unsteadily, and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then relaxed against him, forehead resting on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, two people who had lost each other once finding their way back in the quiet dark. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, promises waited to be kept. And in the stillness between heartbeats, Vincent Russo made the only vow that mattered anymore: to never let go again. The penthouse lay in near silence at 3 a.m, the only sounds the low crackle of the dying fire in the living room and the distant, muffled sigh of the wind against the glass walls. Sophie slept deeply in the guest room, curled beneath layers of down comforter she had never known before, one small hand clutching the corner of the pillow, as though afraid even dreams might steal her safety. Emily had stayed with her until the child's breathing evened into the slow rhythm of true rest, then slipped out to find Vinny. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, in the master suite coat discarded shirt unbuttoned to reveal the fresh, clean bandage Emily had wrapped earlier. The city sprawled beneath him, lights glittering like scattered diamonds on black velvet Lake Michigan, a dark void beyond. He looked small against the vastness of the view, shoulders bowed under a weight no amount of wealth could lift. Emily paused in the doorway barefoot, on the cool marble arms wrapped around herself in one of his oversized cashmere sweaters she had borrowed from the closet. It swallowed her thin frame sleeves, falling past her hands. "You should lie down," she said quietly. Vinny did not turn. I can't. She crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet behind him. You're still bleeding through the bandage. He glanced down. A fresh, dark spot had bloomed at the center. It's nothing. Emily stepped closer. Stop saying that. He finally turned. In the low light, his face looked carved from stone, sharp angles, shadowed eyes, the lines around his mouth deeper than she remembered. Yet something raw flickered there now, unguarded, almost desperate. I keep waiting for it to hit me, he said. The quiet. The knowing that you're both here. Safe. And instead all I feel is terror that it'll be taken away. Emily's throat tightened. It won't. You don't know what I've built, he said softly. Or what it costs to leave it. She reached out, fingers brushing his arm. Then leave it. Vinny covered her hand with his own. I'm trying. They stood like that, hands touching city lights, painting faint patterns across their faces, until the silence was shattered by the soft chime of Vinny's phone on the glass table behind them. Once. Twice. 3 times in rapid succession. He stiffened. Emily felt the change in him immediately, the way his muscles locked, the way his breath caught. Don't answer it, she whispered. I have to. He crossed to the table, picked up the device. The screen glowed in the dark, 3 messages from a number he knew too well. He opened the first. A photo. Sophie sleeping in the guest room bed, face peaceful curls spilled across the pillow, taken from inside the penthouse. Emily's sharp intake of breath cut the air like glass. She stepped beside him, saw the image, and her knees buckled. Vinny caught her before she fell, arm around her waist, pulling her against him. The second message followed. A second photo, Emily standing in the doorway of the guest room minutes earlier watching Sophie sleep. The angle was from the hallway just out of sight. The third message was text only. Beautiful family reunion. Shame if it ends early. Meet me at the old warehouse on Goose Island. Alone. 1 hour. Or they both disappear before sunrise. Vinny's hand shook, not from pain, not from blood loss, but from something far more dangerous, pure blinding rage mixed with a terror so deep it numbed every other sensation. He had secured this building. Armed guards in the lobby. Biometric locks. Private elevator. And still, they had gotten inside. Emily clutched his arm, nails digging into skin. How? She whispered. How did they get in here? Vinny's voice came out hoarse. Someone I trusted sold the access codes. Or they've been watching longer than I knew. He looked at her, then really looked, and the violence inside him shifted. Not outward. Inward. A self-directed fury so intense it felt like his chest might cave in. He had brought this danger to them. He had thought one night of safety was enough. He had been wrong. Emily's face crumpled. She's finally sleeping. Finally warm. Finally not afraid. Her voice broke. And now this. Vinny pulled her close, one arm around her shoulders, the other still holding the phone like it burned. They won't touch her. I swear it. How Emily's tears soaked his shirt. You're hurt. You're bleeding. You can barely stand. I'll stand, he said. For her. He stepped back, already moving toward the closet where he kept a small safe. Inside, burner phone, spare keycard, a compact pistol he had not touched in months. He slipped the gun into his waistband, the motion automatic practiced. Emily watched, eyes wide with fresh horror. You're going to meet them, she said. Not a question. I have to. You'll die. Maybe. He met her gaze. But if I don't go, they come here. And I won't let that happen. Emily shook her head, tears falling faster. We just found you. She just found you. Vinny crossed back to her in 2 strides, cupped her face in his hands. Listen to me. If anything happens, if I don't come back, you take her and you run. There's cash in the safe. Passports I had made years ago, just in case. Names you've never heard. Use them. Disappear. My lawyer will help. He's clean. He'll protect you both. Emily's hands covered his. I can't lose you again. You won't, he said fiercely. I'm coming back. He kissed her forehead, brief, desperate, then pulled away. He moved to the guest room doorway, stood there watching Sophie sleep. The sight nearly undid him. Her small chest rising and falling, safe for the first time in her life because of him, and now threatened because of him. He turned back to Emily. Lock every door. Don't open for anyone but me. If you hear anything, take her to the panic room in the master closet. Code is her birthday. You'll be safe there. Emily nodded, tears streaming. Come back. I will. He left without another word, coat on gun-concealed, heart tearing itself apart with every step toward the elevator. The doors closed behind him, and the descent felt like falling. Down in the garage, he bypassed his driver, took one of the older, unmarked sedans, something that would not scream wealth. He drove into the night snow, swirling in the headlights, mind racing through every possible betrayal, every possible move. The warehouse on Goose Island loomed dark and abandoned, rusted metal walls, broken windows, the river black and sluggish beyond. He parked a block away, approached on foot. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound made his hand twitch toward the gun. Inside, the rival waited alone as promised. Tall, lean face, half-shadowed by the single hanging bulb overhead. "You came," the man said. Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "You have people inside my home," the rival smiled thinly. "Insurance." Vinny's voice was low, lethal. "Let them go. This is between us," it was the man said. "Until you decided to play house. Makes you vulnerable, Russo. Makes you careless." Vinny felt the rage crest violent, consuming, but he held it back. "What do you want?" "Everything," the rival answered. "Your territory, your accounts, your silence. Or the girl disappears." Slowly. The image of Sophie sleeping, trusting, flashed behind Vinny's eyes. The remorse that had been tearing at him all night now burned white-hot. He had built this. Every deal, every threat, every life he had taken or ruined had led here to a warehouse in the snow, bargaining for the life of the daughter he had only just found. He took one step forward. "You'll never touch her." The rival laughed softly. Bold words for a man who's bleeding out. Vinny lunged fast, desperate. The rival raised a hand, not a weapon. A signal. From the shadows, 2 more men stepped out, flanking him. Not attacking. Waiting. Vinny stopped, chest heaving, blood dripping steadily onto the concrete floor. "You have 1 hour," the rival said. "Transfer the accounts, sign over the territory, or the next photo I send will be of an empty bed." Vinny stared at him, rage, terror, love, all colliding in a single shattering moment. Then he nodded once. "I'll do it." The rival smiled. Smart choice. Vinny turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last. Snow stung his face like needles. He got into the car, hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. He drove back toward the penthouse, toward the only thing that mattered now. Inside him, the tearing had reached its peak. Not just remorse, not just guilt. Desperation. Pure, absolute, life-altering desperation to protect what he had only just begun to love. And the knowledge, cold certain, that some betrayals could not be undone, only survived. The snow had thickened into a blinding curtain by the time Vinny returned to the warehouse district on Goose Island. The streets were empty, plows had not yet reached these forgotten corners, and the wind howled between rusted shipping containers like a warning. He parked the sedan 2 blocks away, engine off, lights off, and sat in the dark for a long moment, breath fogging the windshield. His side burned with fresh fire. The bandage Emily had tied so carefully was already saturated again, blood seeping steadily down his hip. Every heartbeat sent a dull throb through his ribs, but the real pain lived higher deep in his chest, where love and terror fought for control. He thought of Sophie's small hand cupping his cheek in sleep. "Don't go away." He thought of Emily's tears soaking his shirt, her whispered plea, "Come back." The images looped endlessly, each one sharper than the last, tearing at the fragile resolve he had built on the drive here. He had spent years convincing himself he was untouchable, wealthy enough to buy silence, powerful enough to bend outcomes. Now he understood the truth: power meant nothing when the people you loved were the leverage. He stepped out into the storm. Snow stung his face like needles. He walked the last block on footcoat open to the wind gun, heavy against his lower back. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark windows like empty eyes, single bulb still burning above the loading dock. He did not knock. He simply pushed the rusted door open and stepped inside. The rival waited in the center of the cavernous space, flanked by 4 men this time. No pretense of civility. The air smelled of oil, rust, and the faint metallic tang of anticipation. "You're late," the rival said. Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "I'm here." The man tilted his head. "Alone. Alone." A slow smile. "Smart. Hand over the access codes, the offshore accounts, the territory deeds, everything." Vinny reached slowly into his coat, careful, deliberate, and pulled out a slim flash drive. He held it up. "It's all here, encrypted. You'll need my key to open it." The rival nodded to one of his men. The thug stepped forward. Vinny did not hand it over. Instead, he spoke, voice low, steady, carrying across the empty space. "I'll give you everything, but first you tell your men to stand down. This ends with paper, not blood." The rival laughed short, sharp. "You don't get to make demands, Russo. You're bleeding out in front of me." Vinny's hand tightened on the drive. "You touch my family, you lose everything anyway. I'll burn it all before I let you near them." Silence stretched, tense, electric. The 4 men shifted hands, hovering near weapons. The rival studied Vinny's face, searching for the bluff. There was none. Vinny took 1 step forward. "Last chance. Walk away. Keep your life. I'll keep mine." The rival's smile faded. You really think you can walk out of here? Vinny met his gaze. I think you know what happens when a man has nothing left to lose. The rival signaled. Two men moved fast, flanking Vinny from the sides. He did not draw the gun. Instead, he dropped the flash drive, let it clatter across the concrete, and lunged not at the rival but at the nearest thug. He drove his shoulder into the man's midsection, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. Wood splintered. The second man swung. Vinny ducked, pain exploding through his side, as he straightened and drove an elbow into the man's throat. The thug dropped, gasping. The rival pulled his own weapon, slow, confident. Enough. Vinny froze, hands raised slightly. Blood dripped steadily from beneath his coat, pooling at his feet. You're done, the rival said. Hand it over, or we finish this the hard way. Vinny stared at him, chest heaving, vision blurring at the edges. Then, quietly, you never had them. The rival frowned. Vinny smiled, small, tired, dangerous. The codes were fake. The accounts were already moved. The territory papers were burned an hour ago. My people are dismantling everything as we speak. You get nothing. Rage twisted the rival's face. He raised the gun. Vinny moved desperate, reckless. He charged straight at the rival, closing the distance before the man could fire cleanly. The shot went wide, cracking into concrete. Vinny tackled him to the ground. They rolled, grappling the rival's gun, skittering away. Vinny's wounded side screamed. Fresh blood soaked through, hot and slick. He ignored it. He pinned the rival beneath him, forearm across the man's throat. Tell your men to stand down, Vinny growled. The remaining two hesitated, guns drawn but uncertain. Vinny pressed harder. Now. The rival choked out the order. The men lowered their weapons. Vinny released him slowly, painfully, and staggered back. The rival coughed, clutching his throat. You're dead anyway, maybe Vinny said. But not tonight. He turned toward the door. Behind him, one of the men raised his gun again, slow, deliberate. A shot cracked. Vinny felt the impact high on his shoulder, burning through muscle. He stumbled, caught himself against a crate. Pain roared through him, white-hot, blinding. His knees buckled. The rival laughed, harsh, triumphant. Vinny turned slowly. Blood poured from the new wound, now mixing with the old. He looked at the man who had fired then at the rival. Then he smiled, small, broken, determined. You still lose, he whispered. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket finger, already on the speed dial he had prepared before leaving the penthouse. One press. A single command. Outside tires screeched. Doors slammed. His own men, loyal ones he had quietly summoned, poured through the loading dock doors. Not to kill, to contain, to end this without more graves. The rival's men froze. Vinny sank to one knee, vision tunneling strength, draining fast. He looked up at the rival one last time. Tell your boss the game's over. Then darkness rushed in. He woke to sirens, distant at first, then close. Red and blue lights flashing through the warehouse windows. Paramedics swarmed him, hands pressing gauze, voices sharp with urgency. He tried to speak, tried to ask about Sophie, about Emily, but the words slurred into nothing. He woke again in the ambulance, oxygen mask over his face, IV lines in his arm, monitors beeping steadily. A paramedic leaned over him. You're going to be okay, she said. You've lost a lot of blood, but you're stable. Vinny's lips moved. My family. They're safe, she answered gently. A woman and a little girl are waiting at the hospital. They're fine. Vinny closed his eyes. Tears slipped free, silent, unstoppable. He woke a third time in the hospital room, white walls, soft beeping, faint smell of antiseptic. Sunlight slanted through the blinds. Morning, October 25th, 2025. The storm had passed. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, small, careful, holding his hand, as though afraid to break him. Emily stood beside her, eyes red but steady. Dad, Sophie whispered. Vinny tried to smile. His voice came out hoarse. Hey, kid. You came back, she said. Told you I would. Emily leaned down, pressed her forehead to his. You idiot, she whispered. You almost didn't. But I did. She kissed his temple, soft, trembling. Thank you. Vinny looked at them both, his daughter, his almost family, and felt the final peace inside him settle. Not with violence, not with power, with love. The doctors came later, stitches, blood transfusions, stern warnings about rest. Vinny listened. He would heal. He would dismantle what remained of the empire quietly, carefully, legally, where possible. He would build something new. Sophie crawled carefully onto the bed beside him, small body curling against his uninjured side. She rested her head on his shoulder. You're safe now, she said sleepily. Vinny wrapped his good arm around her. We all are. Emily sat on the other side, hand resting over his heart. In the quiet that followed only the soft beeping of monitors, the distant hum of the hospital, Vinny understood. Redemption was not a single act. It was every breath after, every promise kept, every tear wiped away. And as Sophie's small hand stayed in his warm, trusting alive, he knew he had finally found something worth more than any empire. Family. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he slept without fear. Weeks passed like slow breaths in the quiet hospital room that had become a temporary sanctuary. October had given way to the first sharp edges of November 2025, but inside the private suite overlooking Lake Michigan, time moved differently, measured in small recoveries, soft voices, and the steady beeping of monitors that gradually grew quieter. Vinny's wounds had closed the stitches, removed the scars already fading into thin silver lines across his side and shoulder. Yet the deeper marks, the ones no surgeon could touch, remained tender, raw, alive. Sophie sat cross-legged on the wide hospital bed every afternoon, her thin legs tucked beneath her, a coloring book open across her lap. The pages were filled now with bright crayon drawings, a tall man in a dark coat holding hands with a little girl beneath a giant heart, a woman with long brown hair smiling beside them, all three standing under a sky full of yellow stars. She no longer drew lonely figures on empty sidewalks or cars parked in the cold. The old pictures, faded, crumpled, carried in the bottom of her backpack, had been gently set aside. Vinny watched her from the recliner beside the bed, one hand resting on the armrest, the other reaching out every few minutes to brush a curl from her forehead. Each touch felt like a vow renewed. Emily sat on the opposite side, knitting a simple scarf from soft wool yarn. The hospital volunteer had brought something to keep her hands busy while her heart learned how to rest. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the fresh flowers Emily changed daily roses and daisies from the hospital gift shop paid for with money Vinny had quietly transferred into an account in her name. She had protested at first, pride flaring the way it always had, but Sophie's delighted gasp when the first bouquet arrived had silenced the argument. Now the vase on the windowsill held new blooms every morning, a small rebellion against the years when flowers had been only something other people could afford. Vinny had spent those weeks making calls, quiet, careful conversations with lawyers, accountants, former lieutenants he trusted enough to keep breathing. The empire he had built was being dismantled piece by piece, not with fire or blood, but with paper signatures and the slow transfer of assets into legitimate channels. Restaurants he once used as fronts were being cleaned, restructured, staffed with people who needed jobs more than they needed fear. Offshore accounts were closed, territory lines redrawn or abandoned. The rival who had tried to take everything was already in custody, arrested quietly after Vinny's people handed over the real evidence, not the decoy he had offered in the warehouse. Justice this time wore handcuffs instead of bullets. Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Dad," Vinny's heart still stuttered every time she said the word. "Yeah, kid, are we going home soon?" He glanced at Emily. She met his eyes, steady, searching, no longer guarded. "Yeah," he said softly. "Soon." Sophie tilted her head. "To your big house," Vinny smiled, small, tired, real. "To a new house. Smaller. With a yard. And a swing set. And a room just for you and your brother when he gets out of the pediatric ward next week." Sophie's eyes widened. "A swing set. With a slide," he added. She threw her arms around his neck, careful of the healing shoulder, and hugged him fiercely. Vinny wrapped both arms around her, ignoring the faint tug of scars, and held her close. Her small body felt warmer now, less fragile, the sharp edges of hunger beginning to soften after weeks of steady meals and unbroken sleep. Emily set her knitting aside and moved to the bed. She sat beside them, one hand resting on Sophie's back, the other finding Vinny's. Their fingers laced together naturally, 3 hands linked a quiet circle no one could break. "I signed the papers today," Vinny said quietly. "Full shared custody. No courts. No fights. Just us." Emily's breath caught. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "I want to be here. Every morning. Every night. Every time she has a bad dream or a good day at school. I want to be the dad she's been praying for." Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks. She did not hide them. "You already are." Sophie pulled back slightly, looking between them. "Are you staying forever, Dad?" Vinny swallowed the thickness in his throat. "Forever," he promised. "No more leaving." The room fell into one of those deep, condensed silences, moments when the world outside seemed to pause so the heart could catch up. Sunlight slanted across the bed, catching the crayon colors on Sophie's drawing, turning them soft and golden. Vinny looked at his daughter, at the way she leaned into both of them now, no longer choosing sides, and felt the last remnants of the old violence inside him dissolve. Not gone. Never gone. But transformed. The man who had once ordered silence through fear had learned silence could also mean listening. The man who had hoarded power had learned power could mean giving. In that stillness, he drew a quiet, humanistic lesson from the long night they had survived together. Knowledge of true compassion begins when we stop counting what we own and start counting who we protect. Lesson after lesson arrives when we finally see that wealth cannot buy back lost years, but love can rebuild them. Education of the heart teaches us that poverty strips away everything except the capacity to hope, and hope, when met with kindness, becomes the strongest force on earth. Another quiet knowledge whispers that no amount of money can replace a child's trust once it is given freely. Lesson upon lesson reminds us that compassion crosses every divide because love recognizes no skin color, no bank balance, no address. Education in humanity shows us that even the darkest paths can lead back to light when someone chooses to walk beside us instead of ahead of us. And one final gentle knowledge settles deep: the richest life is measured not in dollars, but in the small hands that still reach for ours when the night is long. Vinny looked at Emily and Sophie, his family, and felt peace settle over him like the softest blanket. "I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace," he said softly, as though speaking directly to the world beyond the hospital window. The story ends here, not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. A mafia boss who once ruled through shadows now learned to live in light. A mother who had carried every burden alone now shared the load. A little girl who had slept in cars now slept in safety, loved beyond measure. Wealth and poverty could never separate love and compassion. They never could. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental. If this story touched something inside you, maybe reminded you of someone you've lost, someone you've found, or someone you're still hoping to become, please let me know in the comments below. How did this tale make you feel? Does it connect to anything real in your own life? Share whatever rises from deep within your heart. I read every word and carry those emotions with me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that kindness still changes everything. New stories come every day, heartfelt, hopeful, and always human. Goodbye for now, friends. I promise I'll see you again in the next video. Take care. Stay kind. Stay close to the ones who matter most.